All right, great. Well, welcome to day 2 of Bâtonnage Connect. I'd like to remind everyone actually that the virtual walk-around tasting for Bâtonnage Connect is now live on our website. So it's accessible to registered attendees only, and you should have received an email with the link and password to access the site, which houses short videos by some exceptional women winemakers and chefs sharing their wines and recipes. So there are some good deals on there as well for some of the wines, so please do take advantage. We have a very exciting panel today exploring vineyard workers, what's really going on. So this is an important subject that's come up repeatedly over the last 2 forums and is one that our moderator, Elaine Chukan Brown, is particularly passionate about. In our planning and brainstorming for this panel, it became clear that many in this community would benefit from education around the topic, because to be effective allies, one first needs to fully understand what's going on. So we are just about to begin, but before we do, a few quick housekeeping notes. First, you all are muted and your videos are off during the webinar, but we do encourage you to communicate. So we have 2 communication methods available. We've got the chat section as well as the Q&A section. And these are different. The chat section is an informal way for you to communicate with other participants. So just be sure to select everyone in the to field because it can default to panelists only. And then there's a Q&A section. And this is where we'd like you to submit your questions for our speakers to answer towards the end of the webinar. We will do our best to address your questions and are happy to do follow-up for you as well if requested. So also remember, a recording of the webinar will be available. A link to the video will be sent to your email at the end of this week. And then finally, if you have streaming issues, you may want to encourage other members of your office or household to log off the internet, Netflix, etc., to save on bandwidth. You may also want to log out and try logging back in again with another internet server, such as Firefox or Chrome. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Rebecca Johnson. Just going to say a few words before we kick it off.
Thank you, Katie. Good morning, everyone. When Katie and I first started planning for Bâtonnage 2020, as a live event, we truly had no idea how this time would look right now, June 17th. In changing our format, we went from a live event that we were obviously very excited about to a virtual platform. We knew that we would lose some of that actual touch component of a live event, but we knew that we would have some amazing panelists and sessions lined up for you with conversations that would be not to forget. We really can't thank our panelists and our moderators enough. They have given so much of their time and commitment and content. We truly have some of the most remarkable women and man here to really lead these sessions. Thank you, Rory. And thank you to all of you, our amazing Bâtonnage community, the outpouring of support. We are truly humbled and in awe of all the support and outreach that we've received from each of you. So thank you for that. And a quick final thank you to the founders of Bâtonnage Forum, Stevie and Sarah, who entrusted Katie and me to lead this inspiration of theirs. We hope we do you all proud. We hope you enjoy the next 4 weeks, 9 amazing sessions ahead of you, including the one today. We hope it stimulates, inspires, encourages, creates conversation and dialogue. So thank you again for all of your support. We look forward to it. And back to Katie. Thank you.
All right, so just quickly a thank you to Gabrielle Glass, our session sponsor. And then I'd like to introduce our panel. So I have worked quite a bit with Elaine Chukan Brown on some webinars in recent months. So I'm very happy to introduce her again. In addition to writing for her own site, Wakawaka Wine Reviews, she serves as the American specialist for JancesRobinson.com and contributes to a long list of respected publications. She contributed to the 8th edition of the World Atlas of Wine, which has won multiple awards very recently, as well as the award-winning 4th edition of the Oxford Companion to Wine. And she was named by the International Wine and Spirits Competition and in Italy as one of the top 5 wine communicators of the year in the world, the last 2 years in a row. And with her is Rory Williams, who is Director of Viticulture and Winemaking at Frog's Leap Winery, owner and winemaker at Calder Wine Company, and vineyard manager at Tres Sabores. So Rory grew up in the Napa Valley and spent some time working in vineyards all around the world before returning to California. And he started Calder Wine Company just before joining the vineyard team at Frog's Leap in 2012. And since 2015, he's been involved with the winemaking side of Frog's Leap as well, looking to kind of tailor the way Frog's Leap makes wine on a block by block and sometimes vine by vine basis. And now he also farms the vines at Tres Sabores Winery, the family ranch. And then Leda Isabel Garside is a bilingual, multicultural Latina professional. She works at OHSU Hillsborough Medical Center as Salud Services Clinical Services Manager and Cultural Liaison. So Leda actively serves in community outreach communities, coalitions and boards, and is a founder of the Oregon Latino Health Coalition. Currently, she is board member of the Oregon Center for Nursing, Linfield College, Oregon Healthcare Interpreters Association, and Live Sustainable Wine Growers. So now, without further ado, I'll send it over to Elaine.
Katie, thank you. It is really an incredible honor to be able to present this panel specifically to all of you, and also especially to I just want to make sure this is working. It looks like my screen has frozen. So Rory, Leda, can you see and hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. It is really genuinely an honor to present this exact panel to everyone. This is actually the first time a session of this sort has been done in the wine industry for trade and wine lovers. And we actually have people joining us from all over the world. One of the advantages of Bâtonnage going online is that we've actually had people call in for this session from Rome, from the UK, from Canada, and from all over the United States. I'm sure there's also some other countries with us here today, but those are the ones that I'm aware of. As some of you know, I started in wine in 2012. And one of the first things I was actually able to do was spend a day with Leda, shadowing her through a mobile clinic at one of the vineyards in Willamette Valley. It was a profoundly moving experience for me. I was able to actually interview vineyard workers, some of them with Leda's help because of need for translation. And the kind of openness and trust that they gave to me in sharing their stories was really quite overwhelming. It felt like an honor that I wasn't sure I deserved. But it also, as a personal parallel for me, in that, as some of you know, I grew up a seasonal worker myself, commercial fishing in Alaska, and I did so as an Alaska Native woman, only because my great-grandparents were able to be the first Alaska Natives from the region to be allowed to legally commercial fish and then eventually become owners of their own commercial fishing operation. So while commercial fishing and wine are not the same activities, they are both seasonal, and they also have a similar problem in that the people doing the actual work to provide the food, and in this case the fruit, are often overlooked and underregarded. The truth is that in wine, any single one of us who is able to work in wine is only able to do so because vineyard workers are doing the work that they do. And what that means is that vineyard workers deserve the greatest respect and utmost regard, and it is our duty to better understand the state of the industry for vineyard workers and see what it is we can do to be allies to those communities. So that's our focus today, to really try to help make a clear conversation about what it is it's important for all of us to understand about vineyard workers and the needs of the vineyard worker community. A lot of regions are really trying to step up and do well by these communities, and I want to celebrate that. And today's session hopefully will encourage the rest of us to assist that even further. So in introduction, I want to just kind of give us a quick sense of what it is that we're even talking about. The truth is that vineyard work is a kind of agricultural work. And anyone who owns vineyards thereby owns an agricultural business. But agriculture and farming in general have their own unique laws and employment regulations, which are entirely different from other kinds of businesses. So if a winery has a winery, a tasting room, and a vineyard, They are effectively operating three interconnected but separate businesses, each with their own employment laws. A vineyard is an agricultural business, a winery is a production and sales business, and a tasting room is a sales and hospitality business. Those are each separate laws. That means that we have to keep in mind the very unique laws that are relevant to vineyards in this conversation, and also keep in mind the challenges that come with trying to manage those laws while also juggling the laws of other businesses that might be connected. In terms of vineyard work regulations, how those are handled and what the laws are determined at a national or country level. There are federal laws. Here in the United States, immigration and visa laws are incredibly relevant. But there are also state regulations and local regulations, sometimes all the way down to counties. So how employment laws are handled in each of these cases differs widely from place to place. That said, the social concerns and considerations and a lot of the legal things to keep in mind do overlap. So even though we have people from multiple states here speaking today and viewers from multiple countries, there's a lot that we'll be able to take forward across each of those contexts. It's an incredible honor, though, to be able to bring Leda and Rory forward in this conversation. Leda actually started the first vineyard worker healthcare program in the United States. And in fact, Leda, you have been doing this work for 30 years, which is remarkable. And in 2012, when I spent the day with you shadowing your program, I was able to meet a young woman who was there as an intern that you had helped and provided care for as a child. And can you give us an update how she's doing now?
Yeah. Hello, good morning. A pleasure to be here and honored to speak with all of you. And I just wanted to say with this young lady that we're talking about, she is a daughter of one of the vineyard workers that I first met when I started this work. And long story short is she is now a registered nurse. She got not only a degree in community health, that's when you met her, Elaine. She was finished doing that internship for her baccalaureate degree in community health. But then she pursued a nursing, which I've been bugging her for a long, long time. So you need to become a nurse, you need to become a nurse. Well, she did. And she is just finished her baccalaureate degree in nursing. And now she is pursuing her degree as to become a nurse practitioner, hopefully in the next 2 years. So it's a full circle, and it's just amazing to see that.
When I spent the day with you, one of the vineyard workers I was able to speak with, he really emphasized that your presence there not only provided healthcare, but you were really served as a bridge for the community, helping to translate school paperwork, helping to problem solve needs for childcare. And I think that really reflects how this is a complex issue. There's multiple areas and resources that are relevant to the vineyard worker community, not just legal labor laws or actual work time, but a full complex of really what a community needs.
Exactly. I mean, we in healthcare, we call that social determinants of health, where everything that we do surround us, it affects us directly. I mean, if we don't have a proper housing, it will affect our health and that of our children. The same thing with basic access to healthcare. And that has been a challenge for, in our country. And that's why the Salud services was born, just to address that particular issue of how to bring, basic healthcare services to these vineyard workers and their families. And so when we take a look at the whole thing in healthcare, is, if you don't have proper schooling or access to schooling or child care. I mean, it's extremely difficult for a vineyard worker to have to leave the home. Some have to travel to the vineyard really early in the morning, and and who's going to take care of those children? So it's just getting those services, getting to know what is available in that community, so that we can to pass that information. And again, that has to do how your health is impacted with those things that many that that are so important in our lives.
Yes. Over the last decades here in the United States, the reality of vineyard work and immigration laws have really transformed significantly. And Rory, you've actually grown up here in the wine industry in Napa Valley. You know, you started working in the vines at the age of 3, more or less. And of course, now also lead the vineyard team there at Frog's Leap while working in the vineyards at Tres Sabores as well. One of the things that I think is really important to point out, though, is that my understanding is before you were willing to help lead a vineyard team, you actually chose to work in the vineyard, and you actually worked full-time as part of the vineyard team for 3 years before you were willing to step into more of a manager role. I think the insight that implies is really quite important. And one of the things that you've been really passionate about is the recognition that vineyard work is a form of expertise. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Elaine, and thanks, Leda, for having me on this panel. This is very exciting. Happy to be talking about this just incredibly under talked about point. And you know, to your question, Elaine, I think that it's expertise in the vineyards. We're all familiar with the trope about wine being made in the vineyards, and it's kind of rarely examined what kind of form that takes. And you're right, I felt it pretty dishonest of me to attempt to lead a vineyard crew or participate in any kind of management decisions without having walked the walk a little bit. And so, yeah, it was 3 years just full-time on the vineyard crew. And you get to see quite a lot that way. And it's, but and part of it is what we know. It's the long hours, the very early hours. It can be hot, it can be cold. It's very challenging work, but not always challenging in I think the way that is often sort of assumed about work in the vineyards, which is just the manual labor of it is hard. That manual labor is hard, and that's why vineyard work is hard. And my appreciation after working in the vineyards for that long was that's part of why it's hard. But also what makes it hard is that vineyard work itself is its own form of expertise. And we've talked about this in the past, that is not very flashy to talk about very often. It's not flashy to talk about a well-done leafing job or even a well-done pruning job. But that is a form of expertise that really sits at the basis of everything else we do, of making wine, selling wine, of having it be this industry that defines our areas. And the kind of underreporting of that kind of the value of that expertise and the form that takes is something that I've worked to help promote within our own company, but then in talking with others, try to talk about this almost banal nature of the expertise of vineyard work, where it's definitely not obvious at a first glance. It took me years of being a part of the vineyard to really be able to know what the difference was and between the difference between work done expertly and not done expertly. And I think that's valuing that and promoting that is a huge part of I think modern day developments in the vineyard.
One of the other aspects of expertise that I know both of you are also familiar with, but is not publicly really understood very well, is that actually the vineyard working community is really deeply committed and loyal to the work that they're doing and the places that they're able to do the work. And the reality is that vineyard workers individually, but also through their families, tend to have multi-generational connections to a place, often to specific vineyards, but certainly to a region. And in regions like both Willamette Valley and then here in California, it's actually often the case that it's the vineyard team that has more intimate understanding of the very specific growing conditions and challenges of a region. And there's a kind of intimacy of the literal work itself, but also an intimacy of the histories of the place. And in many cases, the people that come in as owners or to start a new winery, they're newer to a region than the very long multi-generational history that come with vineyard workers and vineyard worker families. And I think that's a kind of expertise that's really important to point out here too. There's a kind of archive of knowledge that's intertwined with vineyard workers in a region, and that is, I don't hear people talk about that essentially ever. And so I want to really point that out. But Leda, I know in the 30 years that you have been doing the work you do, there's been so much change in how, in the makeup of the vineyard working community and how they are supported or not, and in access through immigration. Could you speak to some of those changes that you've seen in that time?
Yes, and thank you for mentioning the archive of knowledge. I love that term, and I'm going to use that as I just make myself a note, because that is so true. Well, with the, as you say, and what I have seen is that, vineyard workers are very loyal to the family or to the owner, to the vineyard or the winery that they work for. And I've seen that on my years with this. I've known workers since I started this work, and they still, working there, and we are all, getting up to the age and say, okay, when are you going to retire? Well, when am I going to retire? So we're already talking about those things. And so it's, there's been a lot of change because, immigration, years when I first started this work, a lot of workers, if they have their family here, they will settle here and continue. Some will go after harvest, they will return to their home country and come back right around, pruning season. So they had that opportunity to come back and forth. That has become, in the last few years, that has become more difficult. So people now are settled in the area. And then there is the second generation, because now we're entering, seriously, I'm seeing the third generation in my life with this work. I'm seeing the third generation of vineyard workers, and I'm seeing a change in that as well. Migrant and seasonal farm workers numbers have diminished. We just don't have the numbers that we used to have in the past. And I also have changed the term of migrant and seasonal farm workers and vineyard workers to the term that it is people migrating within their own state and within counties. And so that makes a big difference on that. The migration of going from county to county. And so, and that's a change. Again, people settling, staying here, the mixed status families, what I call the mixed status family is maybe one member of the family is documented, but the other ones are undocumented. Maybe one child is undocumented and now is a DACA recipient, and the rest of the kids are U.S. citizens. So it's just all this different, mix that we have to understand. And as a healthcare clinician, it's been really a big ongoing learning experience, and it continues to be. And it continues to be to my team. As the team members come into my department, I make, not just myself, but the rest of the team that have been around, we want to make sure that that new team member understand all those pieces of the puzzle, because it's not just going and taking somebody's blood pressure.
Right,
it's to understand all those dynamics and the changes that we see in the population.
Yes.
So. And we see it here in Oregon, the same thing. We are seeing changes even, in the businesses, and as you say, the loyalty and that, that archive of knowledge is, as new owners come into the valley, that I hope that they take that into consideration, because that is so important. I have had multiple conversations with the workers about the work that they do. And it's just amazing just to hear them telling me, explain to me how a vine is pruned, why, when they're debudding, why do you keep this one? Why do you cut this one? Why this one has to be tied this way? Why, so for me as a clinician, I also had to learn a lot about the vines and to be able to do the occupational health and safety.
Right.
So anyway.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. But I know, so here, Rory, something you and I have spent time talking about is, with the kinds of changes Leda's describing, it's become more and more important to support year-round work. And one of the things to point out is that legally, there's very different access to resources and benefits for any sort of employee, whether they're defined as temporary versus seasonal, part-time versus full-time, or year-round. Those actually all have different legal classifications, and which classification a person falls under heavily impacts the resources they can access, the benefits that they're expected to be paid, and the hours they're allowed to work and be paid for as well. And so I know something, Rory, that you've done at Frog Sleep is move the Vineyard team to full-time year-round. But that actually, there's kind of two pieces I hoped you could address briefly. And one is how you have very vocally talked about that's essential to quality in wine, especially in the current climate where, as Leda was talking about, things have really changed. And there's a way in which we need to really provide a stronger framework of care for vineyard workers because of those changes. But also that to capture that quality and preserve the archive of knowledge with this community, moving to full-time has been essential. Could you speak to that a little bit? How it connects to quality, and also why the move to full-time year-round mattered?
I mean, yeah, I mean, Leda mentioned in passing there kind of what the crux of it is. Why is this bud trimmed to this length? Why is this shoot tied this way as opposed to that way? The kind of the little things that are the sum total of knowledge accumulated over many years of understanding what the difference between a Merlot vine and a Cabernet vine, how they grow very differently. Those kinds of things, like you tie one shoot incorrectly, it's not a big deal. You tie 10,000 shoots incorrectly, you have a completely different wine. You have a wine that either tastes different and you just got to deal with it, or it's something that requires massive intervention in the winemaking. That is the form that wine is made in the vineyard actually takes, is through these tens of thousands of small steps. Those steps, from the top down, there's a certain amount of control. If you're a flashy vineyard manager or a flashy winemaker, you can come in and, oh, we need them to be at least this way. But it's in the end that I think one of the primary benefits that long established wine regions have enjoyed over many years is that well of knowledge, is that kind of library of knowledge and accumulated history of expertise over time. And that needs to be valued. Very simply, that just needs to be valued. The same way that you would value expertise or knowledge in any other field in the winery, in the tasting room, in the winemaking sphere, in the sales sphere. A lot of what I've tried to do at Frog Sleep and encouraged others to do elsewhere is to respect the differences in expertise that make make each department in a winery different, and make these different areas of labor in the winery different, and respect the differences, because that's where the kind of expertise lies, is in an individual's expertise in their field. But try to consider the kind of consider the stewardship of that kind of expertise, and the promotion of the value of that kind of expertise to be equal across the entire winery, or across an entire business. That you need to value and evaluate and train and promote and pay based off of that kind of thinking. That's a little bit different than even when I first started getting involved in the vineyards, which wasn't even that long ago. As you can tell, it's I think there was kind of a mentality in the past where it was more just about get the work done, and this kind of seasonal nature to things. And it's like you get the job done, and then and they move on, and they might they go somewhere else. That's no longer the case, especially in Napa. The workforce, as Leda mentioned, I assume is true in Willamette as well. It's much more sedentary. Some of that is kind of immigration policy pressures and things like that. Some of that is just the nature of the work, the nature of the counties and the high cost of living here. And I think that makes it incumbent on us to, as people living here, people engaging in that community to understand and respect and seek to become partners in all of the other issues that come up. As Lena mentioned, and we'll talk about all the different kinds of aspects of living in an area. That it's, I think in the past it was kind of, and there are single unit apartment farm worker housing projects here in Napa that seek to help farm workers find individual housing. Well, if you have your entire family here, you don't need a single room apartment, you need a house. And understanding all of the kind of, the benefits that brings. You have your family here, and that's great, and that's awesome. That brings tons of other pressures as well. And I think having a crew here full time allows us, like, if part of it's a challenge where you're absorbing a lot and you're trying to respond to these different challenges that maybe you're not a complete expert in yet, but it makes the ultimate value of a winery, I think, is determined by its people. It's not. It kind of goes back to why make wine, period. It's to get fancy, to get high scores for the prestige. No, it's about people. It's about making people happy, both people who drink the wine and the people who work for you. And I think that the year-round employment has really allowed us to kind of consider that a little bit more holistically than we had in the past.
Well, it's something that that I've spoken about with each of you too, is that there's in the vineyards, there's often a core crew that is working for the wineries specifically or the vineyard specifically. And then at different parts of the year, people will often bring in additional temporary crew to assist with key moments like pruning or harvest, as two examples. And one of the things that, not every winery is able to have a big enough or even any singly focused vineyard crew just for their own vineyards. But one of the things that winery owners who have vineyards and rely on vineyard management companies can do is just very simply make sure long before the need is there, they're talking to other producers in the region and to find out which vineyard management companies really are doing well by their employees and focused on equity and assistance and health and benefits. And because vineyard management companies very easily get a bad rap, but the truth is they do also have very unique legal circumstances and very unique challenges specific to the community of people they work with. And there absolutely are vineyard management companies that are doing well by those communities and by their workers. And so as winery owners and vineyard management owners, just making sure you know what's happening in your own community and who is really doing well by the vineyard worker community is just a very simple, great way to start. Hire the right people is essentially the point. I want to make sure though that we have really strong takeaways for people, and some of the questions that are coming in are going to be answered by the resources that the three of us have compiled as takeaways. And so Katie, if we could start looking at slides. All of the resources that we're about to talk through will also be available on the website. But we want to talk through them now to give some more context. So basically the three of us spent a bunch of time talking and articulated what I hope is a straightforward framework as a way to think about what are the needs of vineyard worker community and how can you actually help and be an ally. So essentially there are 4 kinds of things you can do. And which thing is relevant to you is going to depend on your situation. So it's not that there's only one way to help. Not all of us can lead a vineyard management team and not all of us can provide healthcare, but there's always something any of us can do. So the 4 things that any of us can do are donate. If you have the funds and the resources, you can donate directly to agencies you know are assisting. You can also volunteer, at least with some of these agencies, so by donating your time. Amplifying agencies doing good work is also a very simple thing to do, and that just quite simply means you let other people know about them. and you help spread the word, and you offer it as an opportunity to make a difference by supporting these agencies in various ways. And then you can also support the agencies by offering other resources, connecting them to people that can help, and other things like that. So again, 4 things you can do. You can donate, volunteer, amplify, support. Which one is relevant to you will depend on your circumstances. But then there are also 6 different areas that you can do any of these 4 things in. And we're going to list examples of agencies that each of us have vetted and know are doing a good job in these communities. So briefly though, to start, and we'll talk about this further, the 6 areas are professional development, again, for the Vineyard working community, language resources, healthcare, that covers clinical and occupational in a permanent and often a mobile or on-site location. Legal services, housing opportunities, as Rory mentioned, and very, very importantly, food security resources. So your job after this session, each of you watching, is to find out at least 3 agencies in your region that are doing any one of these things. Just do some research, look up food security and then type your region and find someone who's supporting food security in your region. Try to find 3, and that's just a way of educating yourself further. But we have compiled examples. So if we could go to the next slide and we'll talk through what each of these things specifically mean. So Rory, could you just very briefly explain what do we mean by professional development in this kind of context?
Yeah, I think it's, in this case, it often takes the form of allowing somebody who is very good, they know they're good at pruning, leafing, they're good at your kind of standard suite of basic vineyard skills, but they want to know more about how to identify pest and disease in the vineyard. That's often a prerequisite for moving upwards into management, to becoming a foreman or a supervisor or a vineyard manager, is to be able to identify what does mildew look like. Is that bug a good one or a bad one? Those are the kinds of technical resources that the Farm Worker Foundation and NAPA, just as an example, does provide. Is Spanish language trainings, seminars, especially during shoulder seasons and off-season areas, to be able to empower a farm worker to improve his or her lot in allowing them to develop their expertise and then apply that expertise and use that to move upwards in wherever they're working.
So 3 examples of agencies to keep in mind. As Rory mentioned, Napa Valley Farm Worker Foundation offers classes and training sessions in both Spanish and English to vineyard workers in this region. Nationally, Ag Safe does some training type programs as well. But the other thing that's relevant to professional development is simply remembering that degrees, in our culture, degrees are often taken quite seriously too. And that includes high school diplomas or equivalencies. And so being aware of GED completion programs or high school equivalency completion programs in your region is also another thing to take note of. Could we go to the next slide? So language resources are extremely important here as well. And Leda, could you speak to how that's relevant in this context?
Yes, absolutely. As a native speaker, Spanish, my first language, I had to learn English when I arrived to this country. So definitely language resources are extremely important, and to encourage, the workers to take some English classes, but at the same token, we also need to encourage the workers to complete improve their Spanish, because unfortunately I come across a lot of workers who do not know how to read and write, and that is heartbroken. I was born and raised in Costa Rica, so education was so important growing up. So it is really important to encourage and to recognize that without in a way, and offer that help without shaming, without anything. Yes. It's just a necessity. And that is so important. So just finding out who in your community offer those classes, Spanish as classes. And there's places such centro culturales that they are very common in a lot of areas throughout the country, and they can provide a very, very good resource. And the same thing, you know, we encourage individuals, and this is something for us in healthcare that is extremely important, is for all of us to be champions, and all of you in the business to make sure that if you know that somebody is going to go to a doctor's appointment or a clinic appointment or something like that, to make sure to please help that individual and call that local clinic and local hospital and ensure that they have language access for those patients.
Yes.
That is to be an advocate in healthcare.
No, that's great.
It should not be up to the family to bring a healthcare interpreter, because all of us in healthcare should provide that service for English as a second language. So be a champion on that at your local level. Go ahead, Elaine.
Oh, I just was going to say, and remember too, that if you are working in the wine industry in a production or vineyard context, it is also on you to not to also learn Spanish. That the language learning and the demand for communication goes in both directions. There's also, again, there's tons of very localized resources on language translation and language learning. Some examples that you can look for are local community colleges. Also, the Mexican consulates often have language resources, and even GED assistance resources at times. Here in Napa, we have a specific resource that we've named here as well. But these, and as Leda mentioned, any of us that are bilingual can also be a language resource and assist either by calling ahead or by assisting the family directly. I want to make sure we're managing time, so could we go to the next resource slide? And so Leda, of course, you're the perfect person to talk about healthcare resources as well. Leda actually helped us start Salud there in Willamette Valley, and for the first decade or so, you were Salud. You were the only person providing care, and gratefully it's grown since then. But here in Napa, we also have Ole Health, which provides similar services in a permanent location. But could you speak to what else we should keep in mind around this issue?
Absolutely. One example, as we say here at the North Willamette Valley, one of the things that we're doing with the Salud services is bringing the services to you. So we bring all mobile health services to the vineyards at the vineyard site during work hours. We make appointments, and that is very important because for many migrant seasonal farm workers, or for many of us, getting to a doctor's appointment is extremely hard. So anything that you can do to facilitate that, to bring those services to the work site, it is very important. And I I used to work in occupational health, working in general industry. So I have used that nursing process into agricultural health. So providing these outreach services at the work site, I consider that as early prevention, wellness, and prevention. And it should not be any different like that as an Intel or Google or any of those big companies that they have occupational health on their site, is what we have done with the Salud services. So it's important to work with your local clinics and encourage them to come and visit you at the work site. Health, the other approach that we have done in health is do a holistic approach of health. Unfortunately, in our country, we kind of separate the head and the mouth and the eyes from the rest of the body.
Yes.
And what we have done with Salud services is bring comprehensive healthcare outreach with a focus on migrant and seasonal farm workers and their families. And again, I thank the vineyards and the wineries here that participate with us, that support us 100%, that they allow us to bring these services during work hours, because we know how difficult transportation is a barrier. Here in Oregon, just recently we got approved driver's licensing, so it's not equal across the country about driver's licensing for undocumented migrant and seasonal farm workers. So we have to keep that in mind and bring those barriers down to facilitate those services.
Yes. One of the questions that's coming in, to manage time, we need to address it only briefly, unfortunately, but can you comment briefly on kind of the role of social work and also mental health care in this context?
Yes.
It's a really hard question, and we only have a little bit of time, unfortunately.
Yeah. No, it is big. And with Salud services, again, that's the holistic approach to healthcare.
Yes.
And again, find out who in your community provide those services, reach out to them, and see what, how they can assist with that. I know mental health is a big issue with this population because of many reasons, maybe because you're undocumented, your family is in Mexico, you're dealing with children, some are here, some are there, you have all the family pressures that you receive, that you are getting, because a lot of workers support families down in Mexico, so they have also that piece. And then you compound it by, your legal status, and then public charge. I mean, the list is long. And so mental health is big. We have made a big effort to bring those services. But one of the challenges that we have is that we don't have that many bilingual psychologists or mental health professionals. So we need to continue to find those resources and utilize it to the max. But mental health is big.
Well, and so I want to point out that's a real opportunity for change, that people that are interested in supporting the social work or mental health side of these communities, especially if someone is bilingual, can have a huge positive impact and really help make a difference and build a change in that regard. So that's important to point out. If we could go back, go ahead.
Can I add one more thing?
Please.
The one thing too about mental health right now with the COVID-19, which is what we are dealing with, and one thing I want to report is that we are going, my team, we're going into the vineyards right now and offering that test, the COVID assessment and test at the work site. And we have done almost 300, tested almost 300 vineyard workers. And so, but it's just that uncertainty, what to do if you test positive. Yes. And again, that's a big, it creates a lot of tension, a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, because,
Yeah. So in response to one of the questions coming up, what people can do to help support vineyard worker communities in context of COVID-19, bringing testing to the communities, as Leda mentioned, is a really crucial one. But I want to point out that implicit in what Leda just said is the point that there is an additional stress and strain that comes with concern around the possibility of illness, because it ends up meaning losing working time and thereby likely losing working pay and hours and pay. And so company owners can do things to help increase the available resources to help alleviate this strain. And that's something to keep in mind. How any company can do that is going to very much change company to company, but increasing access to sick leave is a obvious example for companies that have benefits like that in place.
I would add to that, Elaine, that there is the federally mandated paid sick leave if you get COVID and all, and there are plenty of regulations that purport to offer this backstop. But I think a lot of it comes back to building trust between a company or any kind of resource and the farm worker. Somebody on the vineyard team is going to need to be able to trust that they're not going to be punished for using a resource or calling upon a resource. And I think that is something that is incredibly important for companies to obviously that's something that's incredibly important for people to build that trust. I think that that's what the best wineries are doing. It's what the best FLCs are doing, and they are doing that. Farm labor contractors are doing that as well, is building that trust, which doesn't come all at once. But that's absolutely critical to things specific to COVID, but also I've been seeing a lot of additional mental health issues because of COVID, because of the additional stresses that come just from compact family life, from often supporting now more people who are out of work at this time. And so I've seen that kind of pressure really build up over the last several weeks. And it's been, talking about those kinds of issues, it requires trust as a basis.
And so, last year, in Bâtonnage, we had a whole session that was just on what does it mean to, the title was how to, about dysfunctional work environments, but we actually spent a lot of the session just looking at how to build respectful working environments. And that's for people wanting to think about how to build greater trust within your own companies. You can find that session online, and there's really great resources to think about how to instill respectful work environments, because that is really the basis of building trust. So I'd like to highlight that. But again, if you're needing to rely on a farm labor contract company or vineyard management company, make sure you have been talking to your community to find out the ones that really do motivate these positive working environments and taking care of their employees. But let's go ahead and again, we're almost out of time. We want to look at the additional resources. Legal resources are crucially important. Again, what's come up in our conversation multiple times is the mixed family environment that Leda mentioned, and the possibility of people being undocumented. But even for those who are already citizens, there's still a need for legal advice and guidance on employee protections. And as Rory was just saying, knowing that the things that are mandated, whether federally or locally, will really actually not only be available to the employee, but available in a way that is avidly supported by the employer. So this is an example of two groups that offer legal advice and guidance on employee protections, citizenship pathways, and DACA. There are also some vineyard management or farm labor contract companies that help create citizenship pathways by bringing in people from organizations like this as advisors to work directly with their vineyard worker team. So that's something to keep in mind as well. If we could go to the next slide. Again, I'm just trying to manage time. Housing resources, again, are really, really important. And what kind of housing resource is needed is going to depend on the context of the different workers and their communities. So if someone lives here full time, they have, and then if they live here full time with a family, those are each going to be very different needs than if they're here temporarily. Federally, it is actually mandated that anyone here on a seasonal or temporary work permit visa must actually be provided housing, transportation, and access to food by the employers. So that's a new, in the last several years, change at the federal level. But again, how is the individual company managing that is a question. And these are examples of two groups that help provide access to housing and housing related resources. And then the next one, I want to make sure we take a little bit more time to talk about food security resources. I'd love to hear both of you comment on this, but Leda, if you could start.
Yes, definitely. The latest issue with that we're dealing with COVID, and I'm going back to COVID. I mean, food insecurity has always been an issue with migrant and seasonal farm workers and some agricultural workers, but now it has really increased. And so it's so important to know who those resources are in the community and how to pass that information to these workers and their families. And so again, I encourage all of you to look at your local resources, figure out who they are, and guide them to those centers. Another thing too is through the the federal qualified health centers, which are throughout the nation. They also have a good network of information about food insecurity, and they are people can go to those clinics and pick some food in there. So, but you need to know where they are, and I will send that link to the migrants, the federal qualified health centers network.
Great. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, Leda, I don't want to cut you off.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I wanted to emphasize that the food security aspect of this is just so incredibly important. And, even in a place like Napa, an almost unbelievable irony of Napa County being what it is with fancy restaurants is that there is a lot of food insecurity here that's driven by high cost of living, high cost of housing, high cost of healthcare, high cost of everything else that goes into being a permanent resident of an area. And it can, I can't directly change the average rent in Napa County, which is very high. But I can do things to build food security within the community, and that will help the cost of living here. And that kind of assistance is hyper local in a lot of ways. It's really at the local level. A lot of it comes back to regional food banks, however, and it's just an incredibly, there's not a huge number of resources on that page, but it's an incredibly important aspect of what we can do as a community.
Yes. One of the things to keep in mind in terms of trying to assist around food security, again, there's essentially our food banks everywhere and at different sizes and levels. Some are regionally based, some are local based. So that's a really perfect place to start. They often are aware of other kinds of community resources that can make a difference. Local churches will often have different kinds of programs, and there will often be, in a small town, there will often be some kind of local community group that assists around these things. So that's an area where you really need to do some research to know what's happening in your region. But again, local food banks are a good resource that can be found basically in every community and are a good place to start and be aware of donating either food directly or funds, and also volunteering to help distribute food is a huge piece there in terms of time. So we are almost out of time. There's two questions that I want to make sure we address though. And one, Rory, for you is just, there's a question coming out about the affordability of having a year-round team. I know one of the things that you've had to do in order to make it work is really be willing to adjust how the calendar is managed around different types of work. We don't have a lot of time, and there's a question I want to ask both of you after this as well. So could you briefly just talk about what's a way to get started on thinking about it being affordable to have a year-round team?
Yeah, I mean, that's an advantage of an integrated system like we have here at the winery is, we straight up adjust bottling schedules so that we bottle a lot during April and during July, which are typically slower shoulder seasons for the vineyard. We, integration of garden crews and cellar crews. A lot of people in the cellar are cross-trained in the vineyard, and a lot of people in the vineyard are cross-trained in the cellar. So that help can go to different areas of the winery depending on the needs of the specific time. And so, I'm in close communication with our cellar master, Pablo Polanco, who, I can talk to him and say, hey, let's talk about our bottling schedule for this year and how that is going to balance with the vineyard. That is what allows you to kind of remove pressure from one area and really make it so that work is because you can't really change the facts on the ground in terms of when to prune a vine or when to leaf a vine or when to sucker a vine. There is an optimal time to do that. And right now we're in one of the busiest times of the entire year for the vineyard. The growing season is usually the most hours intensive part of the year. And it's when lots of wineries are calling out and vineyards are calling upon extra work. Well, we're not bottling right now. We're not even racking right now. Half of the cellar team is out leafing right now. And the creating a kind of pay structure and a benefit structure that has parity between all the areas of the winery, which is what we've done, allows you to not have hard boundaries between different areas of your business. And I think that the diversification of a business in whatever way possible is extremely important. We work through Thanksgiving, and then vacation is provided until pruning season the next year. We work through Thanksgiving, even though grapes are finished picking in October, by farming ranches. So we'll do river restoration work. We'll do painting jobs and building restoration during November. It's a challenging time to come up with work, but we do it because it's important, because that's what's required of us.
I think in a U.S. context, we're so focused on specialization across all work areas that it's becomes culturally really easy to assume this person's a vineyard worker, thereby their only work they do is in a vineyard. But actually, in making the shift to thinking about full-time year-round employment, seeing this vineyard worker is a person who's loyal to this place and this larger business, and in fact is wildly skilled across all sorts of things, and becoming more flexible in our thinking to see, oh wait, I can actually go out and leaf pull if someone's patient and willing to show me how to help, and they can also come in and somebody that usually is in a vineyard position actually is fully capable of coming in and helping to rack. And so seeing more flexibility across the different aspects of work sounds really important there. The other question I want to address, and again, we're almost out of time, is just that, you know, one of the other changes that's happened in the last decade especially is the increase of women in the vineyard. And this, of course, comes with the shift to people staying in place in a region more commonly. And so I was hoping, Leda, that you could start by talking through what kinds of changes have you seen come up with this increase of women working in vineyards. And then Rory, if you could briefly comment after that.
Yeah, no, I'm seeing a higher number of women at the vineyard, and I understand that during harvest season they're much faster than the men. They compete. So, but yeah, we're seeing more women in the work site. I know there was a vineyard here in Oregon that is in North Carolina Valley that is run strictly by women. So, and it's fascinating to see that. And so, yeah, it's a change, and I think we're going to begin to see more of that. I see some of, again, third generation, third generation of children of vineyard workers who are studying viticulture. I mean, they're going and staying in this business, and so it's increasing, and I think probably we'll see more of that, and with that comes some other training issues that needs to come into place about safety training, and about the same thing, how to to work when you have a lot of women working with you and vice versa. So there's a lot of other training that come along with that.
Yeah, and that can factor into the professional development resources even. Yeah, so Rory, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, here in Napa County, I think it is over 30% of the vineyard worker workforce are women. Now, that is a big change from even just a few years ago. When I started on the crew at Frogsleep, it was 100% male. And we're now, 35% women on the crew. And I think that's been an extremely positive change for the vineyard. I mean, as Leda mentioned, they're really good at their jobs. I mean, it's just a different. I don't know that we would have expected anything different, but it's really cool to see. And as Leda mentioned, it brings a whole host of things that I think are required for not just required legally, but are incumbent upon us as fair and equitable employers. Additional training, the importance of sexual harassment training is, I think, foremost in that. When I started in the vineyard, it was a very macho culture. And that culture change has happened over the last several years. I think is extremely positive towards that, as you mentioned, building a very professional workplace is, I think, extremely important both for the quality of work and for the the quality of life for everybody in the vineyard. I think it's a very positive thing. And so, it's definitely encouraged. And I'll give a shout out to some of the farm labor contractors like Silverado Vineyards have been at the forefront of introducing women into the workforce and really driving that change. And not just women, but transgendered workers out in the vineyards. That, 25 years ago, that's unimaginable. But it's happening, and it's an incredibly important change. And I think FLCs do get a bad rap, and certainly there are bad actors in the industry, but there are real vanguard groups. And so it harkens back to the importance of asking questions. Who actually manages your vineyards, and how do they do it? If you're a vineyard owner, ask the FLC, how do you, all of these different topics, are you aware of them, and how do you help promote resources there?
No, that's shifting to takeaways. I think that's a really important point. And so one of the things we highlighted earlier is you can ask around in your community. If you're a vineyard owner, you can ask around in your community very directly, who are equitably run just vineyard management and farm labor contract companies in the region. Who do people recommend? But the other thing is, when you meet with a farm labor contractor or a vineyard management company, ask them these questions directly. It is actually not only acceptable, it is appropriate and important to ask very direct questions. How do you manage women in your crew? How are you delivering sexual harassment training? What are your views on pay and equity? Like, these are actually the kinds of questions that we need to ask anyone we are contracting work with or working with. And so ask them of the farm labor contractors or FLCs or the vineyard management companies. But Leda, I want to ask too, is there any other takeaway that you would hope people really have here that you would like to add before we finish?
Well, I would like to just say that, and I'm going to be addressing mainly the migrant and seasonal farm workers. These are essential essential workforce, and that they deserve our, our respect and our admiration and our support. That we have to do everything as much as possible that we can do to support, things that are that address their presence in our nation, what they are giving us, they are, and so, and what they represent. And so they're part of our fabric of our nation, and I think we cannot forget that. And without this labor workforce, I think agriculture will look very, very different. The other thing too that I think is important to address is mechanization, because I've been hearing a lot about that. And in the vineyards, I mean, it's a machine can never replace a person, and I think we have to really address what that means. But it's important to keep present the everything that the migrant seasonal farm workers are doing for all of us.
Yes, thank you. I want to restate again, any of us that work in wine, any of us that simply like drinking wine, we are able to have those jobs and enjoy the wine that we drink because vineyard workers do the work to make that possible. There's a lot of other aspects of the wine industry that get a lot of attention, a lot of personal articles heralding their work. Those articles and that attention, of course, are often deserved. But the truth is that vineyard workers, the work that they do, are highly, highly underrepresented. This is the first time a session like this has been done in wine in the United States. And the truth is that while we tried to outline a framework of thinking in terms of things you can do and the areas to think about how you can help, another very simple thing you can do is ask your region or ask wine events to, if they have considered having more panel type resources available around vineyard workers, the importance of their work, what the work actually means, and how to help. That's something you can do as you plan wine events or as you talk to regional groups. Simply ask, can you provide greater resources and ways of thinking for the local wineries or for the wine communities? I really honestly, genuinely mean I am really honored to be invited to do this session. It is incredibly important. I think it's one of the most important conversations we need to be having in wine. And I have incredible respect for both Rory and Leda. And so to be able to present this session with the two of you is really quite an honor. And I honestly believe, I think it's one of the most important things I've been able to do in my work in wine. So I really thank both of you for being here with me today. And I thank Bâtonnage for hosting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you for drawing attention to just this incredibly important topic. And thanks to everybody for attending. And just to reiterate, ask questions of people. Ask questions in whatever field you're in. It's incredibly important.
Yes, thank you.
Likewise.
Well, thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Leda. Thank you, Rory. This was truly an incredible, I knew it would be, but it was such an enlightening session. And for all of you, all of our attendees, just so you know, there will be a recording of this session available, and we'll send it to you hopefully by the end of the week. And also, we hope that you'll join us tomorrow for our next session, Stirring It Up, Color, Wine, and Feminism. This is a panel led by Julia Coney, and it will take place at 11:30 tomorrow. So hope to see you there.